Interviews into prospective candidates for the position of Auditor General began on Thursday by Parliament's ad hoc committee. The interviews were conducted before the public. Parliament had shortlisted 8 candidates before Thursday's interviews, but 2 have since withdrawn. The Auditor General is a Chapter 9 institution. The term of current AG Kimi Makwetu ends on the 30th of November this year and is not renewable. The former Deputy AG was appointed on the 1st of December 2013, taking over as Auditor General from Terence Nombembe. Independent analyst Khaya Sithole joins us to assess this process further. Khaya, thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Always a pleasure chatting to you. I just want to find out, for those who don't know, what is the role of an Auditor General?
Good morning and good morning to the viewers. So the role of the Auditor General is to essentially be the custodian of public funds. They have a responsibility of overseeing the audits of all state institutions across all levels. And of course, all that does is that it gives feedback on an annual basis to the public on how public finances were managed by various organs of state that have been given some allocation from the fiscus. So the importance of that particular position, of course, is that it is quite interesting. It's always quite important for us to know what happens to the taxes that we pay. Where do they end up? Have they been used for the right reasons? And if not, why they were not used for the right reasons? So that's really why it's a critical role.
So with that you're saying, it would mean the new AG who is appointed when this process wraps up is going to have a lot on their hands, considering that we're dealing a lot with this PPE scandal and PPE fraud.
Yes, unfortunately, it is at the time where there's going to be a lot more work for the Auditor General to do, not only because of the new issues relating to the COVID-19 procurement, but also because the law regulating what the Auditor General can and must do has been amended recently, and really the first time that we're going to be seeing the application of the new law is going to be under the term of the new Auditor General. The main difference, of course, is that historically the Auditor General comes and presents elaborate reports on an annual basis telling us exactly how dysfunctional the state of public finances are, and then everybody reads the report and then they go home, they come back next year to hear exactly the same thing. So it's become a bit of a pointless exercise to keep reporting without actually being in a position to do anything about it. So the amendment of the Public Audit Act last year then enables the Auditor General to then now start suddenly saying, well, actually, the reason that 10 billion rand went missing, the reason that 1,000 rand is unaccounted for is because Jacob did this, so therefore Jacob must be held to account for it, and if Jacob is not held to account for it, we should be able to issue a certificate of debt that says, actually, Jacob, you owe the citizens of this particular municipality 10 billion rand, please make a way to pay back.
I want to talk more about now the gender of the candidates that have come in there. So as we know, 8 candidates were shortlisted and 2 subsequently withdrew. And out of the 6, there's 2 women there. What would it mean if the next Auditor General is a woman in South Africa?
Well, the important thing is that we've never had a female Auditor General. In fact, it was only recently that we had a first female Deputy Auditor General. So I think if you sort of look at the gender, balance in the interview stage, in fact, there was only 1 woman who was interviewed because the other candidate who withdrew the night before, Rachel Kalidas, was the other female candidate who actually didn't make it to the interview. So I think it would be quite important if a woman is elevated to the position, because that will be quite groundbreaking. In over 100 years, that institution has never come close to having a female leader. So I think it would be quite a big moment if it did materialize.
And moving on from having a woman Auditor General by chance, I also want to talk about the ages of the people and the candidates who actually applied. It seems as though that there's a lot of young people who are applying for this position. The bulk of the applicants are between the ages of 20 to 30. Is that a position that somebody under the age of 30, for instance, could be able to handle?
Unfortunately not, and I think the applicants you're referring to were in the original long list, where there's a lot of people who just threw their names out there without actually standing a chance. And the reason we knew they didn't stand a chance is that this is one of the very few positions that the Constitution specifically says you must have the following skills. So the primary skill is that you must be fit and proper, and the secondary skill is that you must have specific specialized expertise in the fields of auditing, public finance, and public administration. So, of course, a lot of those between the ages of 20 and 30 would have either not had the requisite experience or even the exposure to those types of fields. So that's why they were all eliminated at the very first hurdle. So the short list of the 8 people that we saw were people who at least met the primary constitutional requirement of being assessed as fit and proper and also having the right technical expertise. And, of course, the purpose of the interviews was to then dig deeper into each candidate and then ask about the type of things you cannot capture on a CV, issues around leadership, style, and behavioral competencies. So the interview process was an extension of really just meeting that constitutional requirement.
Khaya, do you have an idea on what the interview process will be like over the next few weeks, and maybe an idea on when a candidate will actually be elected? Because I do know that the current position ends in November.
Well, the process now is essentially almost complete. They've done the interviewing of the candidates. Some of the candidates have been requested to provide additional information. The committee will deliberate in secret. And once they've done that, they will then table a motion in Parliament to say this is the person that we are recommending. So the committee does not have the capacity to elect anyone. It is the National Assembly that must then make the election, and they need at least 60% of the National Assembly to agree to a person's name for that person to become the Auditor General. Originally, the process was due to be finished by the end of August, but it will now realistically be in the first couple of weeks of September when the committee will be able to approach Parliament with the proposed name. And, of course, the sooner we know that name, the better, because you need to start the transition, because the current Auditor General must be out of office by 30 November at midnight.
And then how do we know that the candidate is independent? How do we know that the candidate is of sole mind and won't be influenced at all by the likes of government? How do you remain as a candidate to be an Auditor General that is fair?
Well, the answer is we'll never know. And what happens during a particular interview process is that the questions are structured in such a way as to try and answer that question based on what can be asked and what can be ventilated by a candidate. And, of course, anyone can prepare for an interview and simply say, yes, I'm thoroughly independent, but the test is actually in the execution of their duties over the next 7 years, where they then conduct themselves without fear or favor, and that is going to be an ongoing assessment. So anybody and everybody, I suppose, would say, yes, I'm definitely independent at the inception point, but that on its own doesn't become the end of that assessment. It has to be done on an ongoing basis. But from what we saw with these particular candidates, they were all able to exhibit that they do not have any existing party affiliations, which was always a big red flag, and they do not have any major scandals hanging over them, with perhaps the exception of one candidate who had to answer for his position, for his past history in the office of the Accountant General. I think a lot of them were able to illustrate that they do not have any specific red flags, at least at the interview stage. We can always discover something later, unfortunately.
And do you think the Deputy Auditor General, Tsakani Maluleke, stands a better chance because of opposition?
I think the important thing that Parliament has to do is that they always need to interview everyone objectively and independently, rather than being seen to be implementing a succession plan or, a coronation, because that is highly dangerous. So you have to always ask yourself the question that on the day of the interviews of the candidates that are put before the country, which candidate stood out head and shoulders above the rest? And, of course, it's undoubtedly Tsakani Maluleke, and perhaps that is a combination of just how brilliant she is, but also we cannot deny the fact that as Deputy Auditor General, she has unique and particular insights that a lot of the other candidates would have had to research and wouldn't have been able to instinctively answer to. So that is definitely how the interview process materialized. It would be difficult to imagine how anyone could trump her for the position. I think she acquitted herself much better than anyone has ever been seen being interviewed by Parliament in particular. And there's a reason a 50-minute interview in her case became a 2-hour interrogation. They had a lot to ask her, and she had a lot of insights to share.
Apart from Tsakani, is there any other candidate that you think stands a chance to be the next Auditor General?
Yeah, I think obviously if you watched all the interviews, let's face it, a lot of the candidates could technically pull off the job based on the fact that by the time they got interviewed, they had a sufficiently exhibited some of the core skills relating to, public finance management and public administration. So I think they all still possibly stand a chance. But from what I saw, it's difficult to look beyond Tsakani Maluleka. Unfortunately, I think she was just so miles ahead. It would be quite ridiculous, in my view, for any other candidate to emerge from the process unless the MPs discover something extraordinary against her, which didn't happen in the interviews. I don't think we should even deliberate on the other candidate.
All right, Khaya Sithole, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Independent analyst Khaya Sithole chatting to us about the interview process conducted on Thursday with prospective candidates for the position of Auditor General as the term of current AG Kimi Makwetu ends on the 30th of November 2020.